once I've established the ASA of my camera, it matches my light meter. If I take a reading with my light meter now, at least it gets me in the ballpark. If I'm setting up an interview or I'm setting up a little dramatic scene, I can use my light meter to make sure that I have an X amount of light that's hitting my subject at various points within a set. And so it gives me a way of sort of calibrating numerically. I can calibrate a set by knowing when somebody stands next to this practical, they are going to reach full exposure. When they go towards a window, the meter can tell me that they're going to go 2.5 stops overexposed. With my light meter, I can verify that if I'm lighting a set. And all these measurements can help you get a real good picture of what you're doing, and you can light a set before the camera ever shows up. That's the other beauty of the light meter, is that it's like having, I think of it almost like a doctor coming into the office and he's got his stethoscope. And how would you feel if the doctor didn't show up with his stethoscope? He has to take your temperature, he has to check your heart. This is the way to check the heartbeat of your set, is with the meter. It's also a great way in doing any kind of narrative or dramatic work of really maintaining consistency. So if I have two people talking and I know I have light sources coming from different places, I can take a light meter reading here. If I know I'm lighting people to a 2.8 and I'm lighting the opposite person, I can put my meter up and see that I've got a 2.8 in both positions. When I go around for the reverse of that person, I know I'm all set up and ready to go. So it prepares me to continue shooting. My light meter kind of gives me a leg up on keeping the ball rolling as far as light consistency. So let's talk about how you actually use your light meter to take a reading. For me, what I like to do is to point my light meter directly into the light source. I want to know what's coming right from that light. So if I take my light meter, most of the light meters have a swivel that moves around so I can point it right into the light, but I can look at the display and I can see that this gives me a 2.8 is my key light. Now what I tend to do a lot of times where there's lots of other lights in the set is I tend to shade the ball a little bit from the top so that really all the light coming in hits my disc and gives me that reading. By the way, there are many light meters that are available. The one that I have grown to love very much is this Spectra Digital Cinemeter. It's not a cheap meter. This is $300 to $400 for this meter, but I find it very useful because to me it's the simplest meter on the market, and for me I like simplicity for changing ASA, changing shutter speed. It also is a very good foot candle meter, and I can quickly hit one little button and go from f-stops to foot candles. That's simply another way of reading the light, exactly the same. And if I know I have a 2.8 from this light source, and I'm interested to find out, well, what's coming in from my fill side, and once again, I'm gonna block this disc from that backlight. I don't want to see that. I only want to see what's coming in from here. I have just under a 1.4 coming in from my fill. So I have a 2.8 from here. I have a 1.4, so I have 2-stop difference from my fill to my key light, and this really comes from experience, deciding whether the way this camera responds, the sensitivity of this camera, with a 2-to-1 ratio, I'll call it. Some people come up with the ratio math a little differently, but I call that a 2-to-1 ratio, where there's 2 stops difference between the key to fill. That's just my way of looking at it. And let's say I know that this camera shooting in Rec 709 looks really good with 2 stops difference between key and fill, so that's where I want to leave it. So let's say, and I grew up and learned how to use a light meter using foot candles. So if I just, and a foot candle is a great way to get yourself used to thinking about lighting. I can transform that to foot candles and say, well, that's actually about 25 foot candles. That's not very much light. That's a nice amount of light for a subject. That's a mellow amount of light. You're not overpowering a subject. I have 25 foot candles coming from my key. And from my fill, I have 6 foot candles. So I could, if I'm more comfortable with foot candles, I can just go around my set and say, everywhere that I want my subject to be normally exposed, I need 25 foot candles. Well, I can do that without a light meter, but boy, it makes it a lot easier if I have this, because the camera is a light meter essentially. The light meter is the camera is a very expensive light meter, and there are lots of other tools within the camera to help you determine exposure. You've got zebras these days. You've got false color. You've got a waveform monitor, but there is nothing quicker, simpler, and easier than using a light meter. And like I said, you can do this before the camera arrives on the set. Now I have a little backlight. I want to see what that is, where that's at. That's 8 foot candles. So it's a little brighter than my fill, or my light meter tells me that's 1/4 1/3. It looks probably on camera a little bit bright, and you'll notice that when you hit a subject with a 3/4 backlight like this, it reads a lot hotter than you would think, because of the skip effect and the angle effect, both on hair and on skin. You get kind of a ricochet effect off the skin, where that edge can seem a lot brighter. Now, through experience, you will discover an edge that you like. Do you like it actually when the edge is just barely there? Maybe it's 3 stops under, where it's just barely noticeable, but gives you a little bit of definition and separation from a background. This is something the light meter can help you with as you pre-light the set, as opposed to relying on a monitor. A lot of people these days are not using a meter, and they're using a monitor for setting their exposure, which I do as well, and I rely on my monitor. But the monitor can really throw you off depending on whether the monitor has been messed with by the last person that used it, and you didn't notice that it was kind of tweaked, too bright, too dark, and you didn't realize that you were underexposing or overexposing. If you're shooting with a DSLR, there's nothing that can throw you off more than the little LCD on the back of a DSLR, especially a 5D, where you get back home and you look at the footage and it looks nothing like what you thought it did, because the DSLR LCD is really not very representative of what's going down on your file. So once again, another a great reason for using the light meter. So just to wrap it all up, I'm a big fan of a light meter. I think it makes you a better director of photography. You can understand the lighting on your set better. Like I mentioned, you're kind of taking the temperature of your set. You can pre-light the day before the camera shows up using a light meter. You can go out and do a scout. I never go out and do a scout without my light meter, because I want to know what the ambient level at the various locations are that I'm shooting, and how much additional light I may have to bring in. Or if I'm doing a documentary, is there enough available light where I don't need any lights? I know how sensitive my camera is, and I go in and I go, well, I've got 25 foot candles in this room. I'm going to just start rolling. And the meter tells me that on my scout. And the last thing I would say, not only does it make you look cool when you use a light meter, it makes you look like you know what you're doing, but it also sets you up so that when you get that job and the guy says, in this project, there's a sequence I want to shoot in film, and you're ready because you know how to use a light meter, and you will be stuck if somebody asks you to shoot some film and you have never read a light meter. So this gets you ready for that project. So enjoy and get to know the light meter.